Joyce Martella, and I was born and raised in a pseudo-Christian cult. My mother's the leader and the founder of the group, and I was there till I was 24. At 24, I left with my husband and 2 children, and struggled for about 15 years. It took me a little while to figure out that I was from a cult, and it took me many years after that to actually look for any kind of treatment or any kind of help in regards to my cult experience. Coming from an environment like that, one of the things that when you're raised in a high demand group like that, you are taught not to seek help from anybody. That's a real big evil thing. Not only that, but everybody who is outside of the cult is evil and they're going to harm you anyway. So you don't really look for help. So that's just a little bit of my story. I'm going to be introducing each of these people before they start, and I'm going to read a little something to you that I think it just gives a little insight maybe to where we've been and what we've been going through. Over time, our bodies are continually marked by our experiences, from original birthmarks to deformities to scars and surgical wounds. The scars of our flesh are an integral part of our personal identity and tell a story of our lives. Just as the physical body reflects our life history, forming a picture of our identity, all of our intimate encounters leave impressions that are reflected in our psyche self. We are identified by the impressions left from moments of being comforted, hugged, or lovingly caressed, and also from the times we were rejected, humiliated, or harmed by those we loved. Our body remembers these encounters just as it remembers the physical wounds with scars, and this occurs even though our mind may have blocked out the memories of those experiences. That's very much how it is for those of us who were born and raised into these cults. We were harmed physically, emotionally, psychically, even our mental development and our physical development oftentimes was harmed. And some of the particular areas that we have real difficulty with when we leave this environment is personal identity, because as a child born into one of these high demand groups, we are constantly told what to be and who to be. And any part of us that comes out that is not acceptable, especially to the group leader, is squashed down because it gets us in trouble. So we bury any of our original self so deep that when we leave, we don't even know it exists anymore, because that has become part of our harming. So when we leave, we can't come and go back to this prior self and recover. We actually have to go through a process of discovery to find out who we are, which is a little more difficult, especially since we've buried it so deep because it caused us so much harm. The other area we have is social integration. Coming from a cult is very much like coming from a different culture. So we have our own language. Even if we speak the same language as everybody in the society that we emerge into, it's a very different language. Words have different meanings. And also because from the time we were very little, we learned how to assess people and figure out what it is that's wanted from us. We're constantly looking for the hidden agenda. We're constantly looking for, what do you really want from me? What are you really saying? So we're looking for all the nuances that might not even be there, but we're looking for them because we know in order to survive, we have to know what those things are. The last area that there's 3 areas that I'm just talking about here, and the next one is our ability to have relationships. Functioning and satisfying relationships is very, very difficult, because almost every relationship that we had, we've been betrayed, rejected, abused, and so now to come out and to try to be in a relationship, this is what we're expecting. Since our own parents, the people who said they loved us, caused us so much abuse, why would anybody else do anything different? And oftentimes we even internalize most of the saying, well, I must not have been an okay person. Since we did fail the cult, we did fail being able to stay and go to our calling and serve our purpose and all the wonderful, grandiose things that we were supposed to do in that cult. We failed that. And then we failed to even keep our parents' love. We failed to keep anybody caring about us. So how can we possibly find anybody outside that could care about us or love us or even say anything decent to us? So relationship is a very difficult thing for us. Not impossible, but very difficult. So that's all I'm going to say, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker, is Gina. And Gina Kadenian was raised in the Transmentational Meditation group as an early child of the Age of Enlightenment. She married and was a parent in the group until age 30. After 22 years of childhood and young adult enmeshment in the TM culture, she left the group with 3 children and obtained an education and career while integrating into mainstream culture. She lives with ongoing cult influence through 3 generations of her immediate family. She's contributed to several different articles in the betrayal of children, an autobiographical essay by women raised in cults, and she's also working on several projects about family influence in cults. So,
wonderful. She's a very tough act to follow. Thank you all for being here. Given what else is competing with this time slot, we are quite honored that you took the time. Obviously, we're here because we feel it's a very important topic that the literature on cult survivors is only beginning to address. And we're really grateful that ICSA allows us to speak and has supported the Martellas running the second generation workshops now for years. My background, as she said, is essentially that. My other credentials related to this would be that while I left physically 20 years ago, I still have ongoing next generation children coming through my home, someone is there for a weekend every few months, sort of getting lightly deprogrammed by Auntie Gina. I was a midwife in my group, not licensed. So the babies I delivered are now 25 and 30. I am now a licensed nurse midwife working in a major medical center. So these kids find out through the grapevine, you can go see Aunt Gina in San Francisco. She's not scary. So there are many, many issues, as Joyce mentioned: self-worth, authority issues, trusting anybody, anything, any group, intimacy, sexuality, abuse, basic life skills, spirituality. What is that? Every level through our entire lives was warped, but we don't necessarily know that when we left. I was out for 15 years before I realized I had been in a cult, and that was only because I work in Berkeley, and my coworker was leaving to help take care of Margaret Singer's grandchildren preparing for the funeral. And then I go, who's Margaret Singer? And here I am. Identity issues are what I'm touching on, the post-cult identity issues for those raised in a cult. Merriam-Webster defines identity, number 1, the sameness of essential or generic character in different instances, different circumstances. That part of us that we carry through, always. Second definition, the distinguishing character of the personality of an individual. 3, the relation established by psychological identification. I want to suggest for all of you who are taking notes, what my children insisted that I include early in my talk here is before they're all bored of hearing you mom, to suggest watching, renting the DVD called Devil's Playground, which is a documentary won awards in Cannes about Amish youth. making the decision whether to continue Amish or find their way in the outside world. And my kids were riveted because they knew that was what, they were children while their mother was going through that. And they see the next group of people coming through. In terms of the recovery literature for cult survivors, it talks about a pre-cult identity. When you first come out of a cult, people who had joined or recruited to a cult, go back to your family of origin, your pre-cult identity, and start to build from that. Those of us raised, well, as Joyce has said, there's fetal life. If you still believe in reincarnation, there's your previous lifetimes. Well, let's see. According to the cult, I'd been a prostitute and I'd been some type of an Egyptian princess. Which one should I start from? A lot of times when we leave, we don't realize it was a cult. We just know this is wrong, we have to get out. But then, to what? We're jumping off into an abyss. Michael's going to discuss the masks that we wore within the cult. We learned, as Joyce said, to wear a mask as a survivor skill. We're hyper-adaptable. It was survival. So what part of us, back to Merriam-Webster, is the essential character that we carry through? We never had one. It was read what's around you and become a chameleon and fit. And then we go somewhere else and we read what's around us and become a chameleon and fit. So when we come out of the cult, and I'm speaking, again, this is not a scientific study. This is purely from decades of helping other people as well as my own experience. We're still trying to adapt. We're still wearing a mask. We believe now we're with bad people, but we're trying to fit in because we knew what we came from wasn't right. I remember at one time, I did get myself into college at the age of 30, did not know I was smart enough to go to school. It's only because a coworker marched me to the registration line and said financial aid exists and you can start and you're not stupid. I later found out I had 150 IQ. I thought I wasn't smart enough to go to school. So I have my 3 children. I'm just trying to survive, go to work, go to college, take care of the kids. My then husband from the cult is playing video games about 60 hours a week because he couldn't function. And I'm having a conversation with myself in the car, and I remember slamming on the steering wheel. There is something wrong with me. I cannot connect. It is not possible that billions of people on the planet are in ignorance was the worst thing you could be. Our cult is supposed to be satanic or something. It wasn't possible. There was something wrong in me. Homo sapiens are social animals. Part of our core identity is our social world. Part of our core identity now is speaking about what we went through to help others. When your self-identity, all of us, our self-identity is partially defined by our social world. We leave our total social world, and then who it is. What's left as that part of our core identity. I think it's very important for therapists who are working with second-generation adults to identify what caused the SGA to leave. We use the term here SGA, second-generation adult, but the reality is many are third or fourth generations. Somebody who leaves on their own had some core sense of, I want out. Somebody like my children, I had protected them from the abuse. They didn't want to leave. They missed, my 30-year-old daughter to this day, misses the sweet, loving community where everyone watched out for each other for her childhood because I had sheltered her from the abuse. She doesn't like that I'm here. Next kid is, great mom, go for it. This is really important. Because he doesn't have as much of a memory. He remembers more the next damaged kids who came through. I think it's very important to find out under what circumstances did the person leave. Did somebody leave with their family, with their parents? They had some type of support. Did somebody leave, as in my case, totally alone? There are now various organizations that help people. And like the kids who come through my place, they know they have a network. When Maharishi Mahesh Yogi died in February, the text messages were flying. The Rish is dead. We're all singing, ding dong, the Rish is dead. So to have somebody else who you can share that with. Again, in my situation, there were only 3 people in my generation of kids. So the next 2 older than me still are in. There's me. My only sibling is now a Mormon high priest. Other people leave and maybe have siblings, maybe have cousins, maybe have someone else to help them. It's very, very important, I think, for a therapist to find that out as they're working with the person who's leaving. As well as to find out if the person really didn't want to leave, as in the case of my daughter especially. How does somebody build a core identity when they don't have one? That's a real tough one, especially if you don't know you were raised in a cult and didn't know to access these unique types of resources. A lot of times when someone doesn't yet have a core identity, they're very vulnerable to another set of manipulators, whether it's one-on-one cultic relationships or another organization. My brother joining the Mormon Church because he wanted to support. Sometimes what we do is just accept our roles, which is, again, what we did in the cult, defining ourselves by roles. In my case, I wanted to raise my children, got them into Boy Scouts and Little League, and just jumped into trying to give my children what I never had and trying to build them some type of support framework. Whereas my brother did that by going to the Mormon Church to give his children the support framework we didn't have. Something else is that what my children have pointed out to me, again, my children are now grown, is the heightened arousal that I have and that I've seen in the other kids who left as they got older. And again, the movie Devil's Playground addresses this as well. The high arousal, fight or flight reflex, we had from a very, very young age because we never knew when we were going to be slapped down for saying or behaving in an unacceptable way. And oftentimes we never really knew what the rules were because we may not have gone through some of the indoctrination that our parents had gone through, and yet we're living in it. There's also, we grew up, many of us, when there was some association with outsiders, with being taunted as children. I learned a new term today. Wafers, people who grew up in the way, when they were out and about, the other kids call them wafers. We were called roos. I'm the first roo out of Fairfield Public High School. That's Iowa accent for guru. You are guru. I was a roo. That's my claim to fame, first roo. And then kids come from polygamy communities are sometimes called pligs. Oh, it's a plig kid over there. So you've grown up being afraid at a very core level of the outside, as well as having the heightened arousal from within the movement of the organization. That manifests later in various other ways. I still have anxiety whenever I receive an email or a phone call or being called into a meeting with a supervisor at work. I'm not being reprimanded. Usually they want my advice. I've taken the cult hyper work ethic and done very well academically, and I'm respected in what I do professionally, which has nothing to do with the cults. But that hyper arousal, that anxiety about being called in by your superior. And I also have a hyper startle reflex. When my kids try to surprise me, or they're not trying to surprise me, someone just comes up behind me to say something, I totally jump out of my skin. And it took many, many years for me to realize that's where it came from. We often learn to dodge conversations about our upbringing because there's an element of shame, there's an embarrassment, there's how is the outside world going to accept this? And that I'm speaking from my own experience and a lot of the other kids I know who have left. Some of us grew up in very small communities that had no exposure to the outside world. I grew up all around the world. So something might come up in conversation about where I grew up or what different countries, I speak 3 languages. Oh, you were in a military family? Well, no, not really. Oh, no, what's the special of the day today and how is that prepared? Just dodge the conversation. We're not going there right now. We learn how to do that, to dodge the conversations about where we came from. We're also very good at taking care of others because many of us were taking care of the younger children beyond us and are continuing to do that when we leave. There is a price to removing the mask. By keeping the mask on, we can still have contact with the cult, which is our original identity, which is our entire family. It allows us access to help our younger siblings, our younger relatives come out. By removing the mask and coming out publicly, we are now known as demons to our original group. Which means the next group of kids in my group are told, yeah, Aunt Gina, who delivered you, is a Rakshasa now. She's gone to the dark side. You can't go see her. And they have that fear. So by speaking forth, we've also cut off one part of our identity while we're in contact with that, while we're also accepting another part of it. I'm personal good friends with Jim Jones Jr., who happens to not be there on the fateful day of November 18th. We've had, of course, extensive conversations. He lived with the guilt of believing that he was responsible for 900-some people die because of his selfishness, that he did not go back when Dad said, you need to come, the senator's coming to visit. He said, no, Dad, we got a basketball game. We got to stay and play this basketball game. And he believed that if he had not been so selfish to play basketball, that he possibly could have been there and talked his father out of the ritual that went into place. And again, that comes back to our core level of it is our fault. It took him about 15, 20 years to realize, no, he couldn't have stopped it. That's why his then pregnant wife and one of his siblings died there, along with his parents and 900 people he loved. That basketball saved his life. He went by James Jones for many years. Got into the medical field because he had background working in nursing homes. His father owned a bunch of nursing homes. That was an easy step in for him. But he always bit back the jokes. Oh, James Jones, better not have to give me any Kool-Aid. They had no idea they were speaking to the African-American adopted son of the Reverend. I said, when did you tell your wife? He said, well, I figured I better get it out of the way pretty early. Don't want to waste any time. So on the 3rd date, he's in the car, tells her who he really is. I said, what did she do? He said, well, the next red light, she jumped out of the car and ran 3 blocks. That's the sort of reaction that we get. He's, of course, a more dramatic version. Ultimately, in my situation, I built my other life before I started revealing who I was, as did Jim, known as Jimmy. So we have a social context in which we're accepted. Because to be totally alone without a social context at all, if you say you came from a cult and you haven't yet built another social context, is very, very, very difficult. When I started telling people, after I first presented at ICSA 3 years ago, one of mine said, Francis, really, you grew up in a cult? You don't look like one of those people. I said, what does a brainwashed person look like? Another friend of mine, very well-intentionally, she knew it was a big deal for me to come forth and tell this, and I go over to her house at a Christmas party. She pours me a glass of wine in the midst of a big group of people and introduces me to her one friend and says, oh, this is my friend Gina. She grew up in a cult. I'm like, It was very, very good because to them it wasn't a big deal. We also lose the comfort when we leave of the conviction that we are right about anything. Because if we were wrong about the method of salvation, if we were wrong about what we believed in how to interact with other people, what are we right about? I still have funny little tracks that come up periodically, and Jim and I have joked about this. And he says, for example, he can be sitting at a table with professionals, having a dinner, he's in the medical field, And somebody starts telling some funny jokes about learning to ride a bike when his father taught him how to ride a bike. And he wants to tell about when his father taught him how to ride a bike. But everyone knows who he is. He can't tell loving stories about his father teaching him how to ride a bike, because his father's Hitler, right? I try to, things come up in different times. I was thinking about some relationship problem with somebody, and I go, automatically an old track comes up about, oh, if you have sex with him, you exchange karma for 7 years. That's still in there. It has nothing to do with anything. But these automatic tracks are always there. I think it's important that therapists look at variations between different groups. The degree of isolation, the degree of exposure to outside. People who have had some exposure to the outside seem to do better. They have something on which to base on. For me, my outside exposure was in another country. My parents used to leave me with relatives in Italy while they were off with a guru. But in the English-speaking world, my total exposure was in a cult. But I still knew that people could be outside the cult and be good people. That was what I fell back on. Maintaining contact with the family of origin. The cult recovery literature emphasizes have no contact with the cult. I think that's a highly individual decision, because that background, we love those people, and that's something Jim and I have talked about a lot. Granted, all of his people are dead, so that's, contact is not an issue, but we both love and see the goodness in people who the rest of the world considers crazy. And to cut off all contact with the cult means cutting off all contact with loved ones and the ability to help them. So the whole idea of living with secrets or not, either way, as someone raised in a cult, you're going to get burned. Because if you divulge the secrets, you lose that contact. And if you want to keep the contact, then you have to live with secrets and live a double life. I'm just going to skip to the summary because I'm running out of time. But the thing to realize is identity is very, very multifaceted. And inventing your identity as an adult is, as she said, very, very difficult. And I would suggest a therapist to help somebody find what is it that interests them. One of the things I did, for example, when I was on the verges of leaving, is I started hanging out with the Amish. I learned to quilt. I still like to quilt. Someone else, it might be music. Someone else, it might be that they like to read. Whatever it is, find some core, something they enjoy doing, and build from that. The cult, for those of us raised in a cult, it is always an active force in our life. Always. It's in the third generation that comes beyond us. And I think it's very important that the second generation adults, or if they're third or fourth generation, learn to be very, very patient with themselves. It takes years, it takes decades. We always have gaps. I can never make up for 30 years of my life during which I did not live through the history that other people lived through. I don't know the music, I don't know jargon, I didn't see the movies. I lived the White Album of the Beatles. That was all about them leaving the TM movement. But beyond that, I'm really clueless about things that everyone else refers to. So, and to realize that for the SGA, whether to keep the secrets or not is very, very personal. And that might change over time, because the price of keeping the secrets and the price of divulging the secrets are equally high. And that's very, very different than for someone who went in and left. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Michael Martella, and I don't have to read his biography. Okay, next we have Michael Martella, and I don't have to read his biography out of here. I know him. He's a marriage family therapist. He's been doing counseling for over 20 years. He works in domestic violence, has been doing that for about 17 years. And for the past about 6 years, he's actually been working in the SGA arena, you know, really looking at healing for second generation people. So, take it away.
Hi. Um, so I think it's a little bit longer. I think it's been about 8 years ago I came to my first ICSA conference, and I'm so grateful to their adaptability and their encouragement. When I first arrived, the SGA, or second generation phenomenon, was relatively new to the organization, and there was primarily the discussion was about leaving a cult and returning to your pre-cult personality as a base. And of course, a slowly growing number of people coming to the ICSA saying, what are you talking about, pre-cult personality? This is where we were raised. This is where we were born. And so then there was some time of saying, well, you had some kind of pseudo-personality, or you have to build a personality from scratch. Which is not totally inaccurate, but of course I think it's not also completely accurate. The idea is there is a SGA personality construct. There is in fact a self.
Can you talk a little louder?
Oh yeah, I can talk louder. I can talk loud. So there is a personality formation for the SGA, for the second generation adult. It's just a very damaged and very simultaneous personality. It's an adaptive personality, but it's not a non-personality. It's, in fact, a very complex, very well-developed personality, despite the fact that it's not particularly authentic or normal. It's certainly not normal. It has strengths and weaknesses. And one of the ideas that I've been using to describe this process is this idea of masks, and the mask that we wore, the idea of at least two characteristics of the SGA would be the development of a private and a public mask, a personality in conjunction with the cult's expectations, and then the development of a personal personality on the margins of that larger cult personality. For SGAs, almost always they do represent the dream coming true of the guru and the guru's disciples, and the personality that they're supposed to be presenting is one of appreciation for this specialized life and learning, and proving the validity of the life they've lived. And so, for SGAs, there's a constant pressure to present a version of self that is consistent with the group's belief systems and goals, and ultimately the guru's personality. From the inside, how this feels is an endlessly untenable position, where the self has no value, is in fact probably sinful and dangerous and counterproductive, and where the public self is always what is rewarded, always what is being looked for by the environment all around you. The constant demand of that public self is impression management. The SGA is incredibly efficient at picking up the cues of the environment and developing a persona that gives the appropriate impression. The SGA is real efficient, and usually, if they're all successful, they're very good at calculating the possible consequences and benefits of every situation, all the time. Breathing, sleeping, eating, waking. The job is to develop a performance of self that is sufficient to help you make it through another day. I'm always saying, I find, it's definitely me too, but I find among my SGA peers a sort of a deep underlying depression it comes from the sense of self being meaningless and worthless, generally speaking, and this public self, this public transcript, being the one that's always valued. And knowing that there's nothing you could ever do that will do it good enough to make any difference, because always tomorrow the demands will change, the environment will change, and it'll never be good enough, and it's not even real. So it's just becoming extremely skilled at presenting what do you need from me today. I love this term. The idea is, how can I present a sufficiently credible performance to not be in trouble or in pain more than usual? It's the idea of personal attainment is not the issue. It's avoidance of personal disintegration is the issue. I was talking today, and I've been hearing this conference, people talking about, well, especially if it was your parents, and I was saying, what a strange, as an SGA, I never really thought of that. I didn't learn about family and parents and stuff. Actually, when I got out, one of the sort of interesting constructs that I was able to rebuild upon once I left was the idea of family, and so I did sort of, oh yeah, I had a father, oh yeah, I had brothers and sisters and stuff like that. But inside of there, that is such a joke. I mean, it's funny because we really focus on it once we're gone. But inside of there, it was just another piece of the puzzle. And who was significant to you on any given day was whoever had the power to hurt you the most. That's who was significant. And that could, for months at a time, not include your primary caregiver or your siblings. And frankly, your love for them was one of your biggest vulnerabilities, not part of your strength. Later, it may be something you go back and develop a sort of a pseudo-strength around, that you did have family and blah, 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 blah. But at the time, it was just part of your vulnerability. Sometimes, and it's interesting, I was really hearing Gina, and I think it's so true that there's the configurations, I think most of us who were SGAs went through periods of time, and we saw many of our peers get stuck in certain profiles. The constant rebel, they're in really big trouble. If you're a constant rebel in a cult, born and raised there, you will be relegated to incredible levels of abuse and deprivation and isolation. Most of us learned how to be sufficiently credible to only do that from time to time. And most of the time we learned how to become very proficient at staying under the radar and getting our needs met despite the lack of any support for our needs whatsoever. Many times, from time to time, I've heard this term among my fellow SGAs for the last 2 days, which is I was sold out. We did, in fact, always, we were trying to sell out if we could get on the inside. We were being constantly presented with this possibility that you could actually be this imaginary version of the holy child that showed the product of the work, and that it's all we knew. We thought it was real, and we kept going for it, and occasionally being told just a little taste that it was ours, and enough to seduce us for a little longer. In the process of that would require, of course, always selling out our peers, being extremely good at lying and cheating and stealing to get enough energy, enough attention to survive another day. I think it's so funny. Those of us who are SGAs know that we're just like such efficient liars. It's just unreal. Lying is much more natural than being authentic, which is unnatural and unholy and unreal. So we're pretty good at that, lying and supporting lies. Now, oh my gosh, do we know how to back up somebody else's lies. It is a part of the legacy of being a good SGA that you have learned exactly what is the dominant set of lies that your cult is trying to convince the world of, and how to do it so naturally and so fluidly and so spontaneously as to suck in every outsider all the time. every new person all the time. And the idea of that being a conflicted thing, that is not a conflict. That's life. It's not a bothersome detail. It's just part of managing your life. Running out of time already. Anyway, wait a minute. The self, I still find that an interesting concept, the idea of the self. It's still a rather vague thing for me. I've been gone for 20 years. I'm working real hard on I've really committed to the theoretical construct of the idea of the self. It's still, to me, primarily an act of faith. I see it much better in my children than in myself. I don't really feel it to myself. I just sort of see it and I act as if there's a sort of a true, authentic self, and it's working better than ever. But, and my children's lives proves to me that it does exist, but it's still somewhat of a construct for me. The self I was taught was, in fact, the epitome of evil and corruption and destruction. In terms of the self, it is something to be sort of seen as a shameful and embarrassing part of who you are, and certainly the source of all your sin, all your problems, all of your failure. So in this environment, nonetheless, there is the development of a hidden self, a hidden transcript that's actually pretty vibrant. It occurs at the margins at all the time that you're creating this huge public self. For brief moments in stolen places at stolen times, throughout that entire time period, you are piecing together this fragmented version of a marginalized self. That's sort of real too. That's found in hidden secret acts of subversion and resistance and passive-aggressive responses. From time after time, finding ways to mock and deride the leadership and the values and the beliefs of the leadership, always with a couple of little friends on the edges. You'll be betrayed by it tomorrow and be in trouble for it, but it sure was fun today. Clandestine luxuries. I love sitting around with groups of SGAs and talking about our stolen luxuries. Whether it's a hidden tape recording of the Beatles, which wouldn't be there, but whatever it might be, little smuggled food, smuggled clothing, smuggled beliefs. The list of the fragments that the SGA has pieced together to create this clandestine or hidden self is actually always touching to me after all this time. But the idea is to become an expert in the power of those around you and to be able to manipulate and exploit and use that power. It does make us, I think, not the greatest of lovers and friends because as a group we're pretty good at being able to be exploitive and unauthentic. We're pretty good at that. And it's really hard to be real and to believe in being real after what we've been taught. But we're very good at things like insolence, being insolent and being sarcastic and derisive and disbelieving and subversive. We're real good at that. We come from a system that absolutely abhors individuality and self-determination. It's one of the things I hate so much about. I personally do feel a lot of passionate hatred towards the cult leadership always. Not actually personal so much. Frankly, I was raised as a golden child. I feel a lot of affection and love for my prophet, Joyce's mother. Treated her like crap, treated me pretty good. I feel a lot of affection. I was thinking when Gina said, well, we love them and we find the good in them. I actually don't think there's any good in that prophet of mine. Actually, she's a horrible, disgusting person, but I nonetheless love her because you are a child, you love people, and that doesn't mean there's any good in them. But it also doesn't mean that the love isn't genuine. That's all you have. So there is a lot of love there. But I am theoretically, or from at another level, I feel a lot of hatred and anger at leadership and the people who institute this kind of life for children, because it is so devastating and empty and lonely and so full of betrayal. The more powerful the threat, the deeper and more comprehensive is the mask. And eventually, the face behind that mask has molded itself really well to fit that mask. We're real good at cynical manipulation, and self-preservation is what we've learned. And of course, Juliana and I were talking a few minutes ago about, the sort of two general versions of people who come out, that cynical manipulation and ability to put self above others can make you a real failure in society, or it can make you a real success in society. If you figure out how to make it work for you, it can make you quite successful. I developed a very thriving private practice working in domestic violence, and I have a very solid reputation. Most of that built while I was a suicidal, empty shell of a human being. And the person that I've become has actually been able to be more of what I managed to convey to others that I was. And so I've committed myself to becoming the person that I convinced others that I was. But it wouldn't have bothered me to have stayed that be a presentation of self. That wouldn't have been a problem. I could have done that right up to the day I died. And so it's been interesting and fun truly fun to invest myself in the idea of being a caring, decent, loving human being. But it was an option, certainly not a necessity. What it was a necessity was self-preservation and in an environment that did not have any desire for me to preserve myself. So that's a little bit about some of the masks that we wore. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Juliana.
I've got theme music.
Yeah? I'm not sure how to say your last name, so I'm not going to butcher it. She was born and raised in the religious cult Children of God / the Family. After leaving the group, she worked with, I'm not sure what that is, charity. You would have to say what it is. Thank you. Helping the child soldiers and children directly affected by the rebel warfare in northern Uganda. She is co-author of Not Without My Sister. It's a best-selling book. It's really good because I've read it. And she detailing her unique experience growing up as a second-generation cult child. And she's also the executive director of Rise International.
Like Mike was saying about children growing up in cults being very good at staying under the radar, I was never very adept at that. I think I was a born rebel, and because of that, I probably got a lot of the harsh treatment he refers to for those who did speak out or raise their heads, which were knocked down pretty quickly. But I think one of my primary reasons for leaving the group was because I saw a lot of injustice that had been done to a generation of children, which was being sort of swept under the carpet. Now that time had passed, they're saying, oh, we've changed, history, is different now, and they were rewriting history. So even within the group, I started to speak out, saying, well, that's not right, because it did happen. It happened I witnessed it happening on a massive scale. It was institutionalized abuse within our group. And so when I left, I sort of felt, I think within the group there was a whole idea of sort of a mafioso of what happens in the family stays in the family. And you don't tell your secrets to the outside, you protect your group at all costs. And because of that, those of us who leave and do start to, speak out or try and seek help or justice for those who were very badly harmed and damaged are often demonized. And like she was, what was your demon?
I'm a Rakshasa.
You're a Rakshasa. I'm a Vendari. In fact, the leader of the Vendari. No, but so I think I started writing the book as a way of self-therapy, as a way of making sense of my past and trying to find my own identity and why I am the way I am now, and what do I believe, what do I think, what do I know. And off the back of the book, then we, myself, a few other ex-second generation kids, we thought, these the kind of enclosed environments and extremist and isolated groups have that potential to abuse children, and it goes under the radar. The government doesn't know what's going on, and there's a sort of a aura of mystery or paranoia that surrounds the idea of a lot of cults, and people would rather not know than know. So we set up Rise International, which works to protect children from abuse in cults. Briefly, we advocate for children's human rights and support those who seek justice for the crimes committed against them as minors in these groups. And we work to raise awareness amongst the public, government, charity organizations over the dangers and difficulties that children face growing up in cults. Because knowledge is power, and we believe the more information is out there, the less likely it is for these abuses to occur, and the less likely it is for history to keep repeating itself, as has been shown with FLDS. I'll go into that a bit later, but when I first heard about it, I would thought, my God, history is repeating itself all over again. Our cult was raided in the same way, we were all returned in the same way, and they said that we weren't abused in the same way. 20 years later, I have the signatures of over 300 children already claiming they were badly, sexually, physically, mentally abused. And now it's too late to prosecute. It happened in locations around the world. We don't know the names of people who did it. It's almost impossible to prosecute now. So these are the issues that we face, which are very difficult to know how to go about, but we're doing what we can, and we're a fairly young organization. But as Marcy Hamilton talked about this morning, which I felt like standing up and giving her a massive applause the whole time, anyway, there are many who use their right to religious freedom as a carte blanche to do whatever they see fit with the children in their care who are born and raised in these groups. I do believe in the right to religious freedom, but I do not believe that this gives anybody the right to abuse another person's right, especially innocent children, and defenseless children. So, for example, look at the children in Jonestown, Branch Davidian kids. They were all killed. They didn't have a choice to be born into these groups, but they were, in one case, murdered as a result of their parents choosing to kill them. Or the children, for example, that Marcy talked about this morning, who don't have adequate medical care and die because of the choice of their parents. So why is there no children's rights within these groups? What is the problem with our society where there is such a strong determination to hold on to this right of religious freedom, which is all good and well, but nobody cares what happens to these children underneath their care. So I believe that if these groups want to retain a certain amount of legitimacy in society, that they should be more transparent and that they should institute child protection policies, clear child protection policies, and I think that this would go a long way towards easing the minds of the public, the government, about what goes on within these groups. So that's why Rise International seeks to work with both government organizations and with these cults to see what we can do about ensuring that children have a safe and caring environment to grow up in. So as a second generation born and raised in the Children of God Family International, I personally was not given access to an adequate education. I was not given any kind of health care. I was never informed of my rights. Many of us raised in this group around my generation were systematically abused sexually, physically, emotionally, and psychologically. And this was all justified under religious dogma doctrine of the cult leader, who would twist Bible scripture to his own ends, to what he wanted. And it's well known now, he was a pedophile, he had incestuous relationships with his daughters, his granddaughters, and he instituted a belief belief called the law of love, where anything done in love was not wrong. So any abuse that took place, we were told as children it was done in love. Therefore, it wasn't wrong, it wasn't abuse. So when when government organizations or the police started to look into our group, we had been so well trained that we were not abused. You are not abused. That when we were asked, we genuinely told them we were not abused. And so what happened when we were raided in communes in Australia, Argentina, there was a massive court case in the British Isles, and in France there was raids, and hundreds of kids were taken into custody. But what happened is the authorities did not have enough information to ask the right questions. The questions they asked were they didn't actually want to know. And for example, if we had been told, have you ever been sexually penetrated by an adult? They would have found that many of the kids would have said yes, but they didn't say that. They said, have you ever been abused? Of course we said no, because we weren't been abused. Of course we said no, because we weren't. It was done in love, or what we were told, it was done in love. So I think that there needs to be more education. People need to know what questions to ask, what to look for, what are the signs, because children, we were given such a fear of the outside world instilled in us from the time we were babies, that the government was the devil. The police were Antichrist soldiers who were going to come and kill us all. And this is what was told probably as well to the children in the Branch Davidian compound in all these isolated groups. And so when we were raided, it was almost a fulfillment of prophecy, like they're going to come and get us. And I'm sure that's what the FLDS kids faced as well. It's like they were under the care of demon-possessed people, So that's even more reason why they wouldn't tell what's going on within, to protect their families, or they just want to go back to. I think the idea of it is better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. So you'd rather be in the group, at least you know your environment, you know what cues to look for, you know who's the more evil adult, who's all right, who's going to beat you, who's not. Whereas if you leave, all you know is they're the devil. It's frightening. Also, parents within the group were often physically absent, and if not physically, definitely emotionally absent, because they devote all their time and energy to the group. And they would leave the children within the care of any random adult within the group, because if you were in the group, you were considered a brother or sister, and you could do no wrong. And so they never thought to question or to do background checks even, whether these adults who were taking care of the children were, qualified, were safe to do so. And because of that, and because of the whole sexualized atmosphere where it wasn't seen as bad for children to have sex with adults, it wasn't seen as bad for children to be beaten, it was, all forms of physical punishment, it was just seen as a way of controlling the children and primarily breaking their will. Because the minute they would take the strong ones and break their will, everyone else would follow. Like the head sheep following the shepherd, and all the sheep follow the head sheep. So what this does is, and it's not just it wasn't just in our group, but I happen to know that in many of these isolated groups, children are passed around into the care of adults. Not for a minute should you ever imagine that they're always under the care of their parents, because they're not. And this already, just in itself, potentially puts them at a greater risk. Just by way of there being such explicit trust within the group. And then children often report feelings of desperation, helplessness, confusion, abandonment. You don't know who to turn to, who to trust, and you know your parents will not protect you. And, sorry. I have here a few people who have written different things to me, just different memories of their time within these groups as children. And these are some of the very kids who were seen to be not being abused. And it's striking to me how they always had two desires. The main desire was somehow to escape. And many of them thought their only way of escape was suicide. And the ones who didn't think that physically did try to escape, though often were brought back. But they were too afraid to actually tell the police why they were escaping, so they were brought back. And this one girl, she says, this is her memory, she says, I'm sitting in a small room with 21 beds. All 3-story bunk beds. I have a 12-inch sign around my neck that states, "Do not speak to me, I am on silence restriction." My eyes and face are stained red from crying. My teen shepherd's evil face is burned into my memory, and his screaming continues until my ears ring and my head pounds. My hands are cut and covered with blisters from hours of hard labor out in the fields. My back aches, my body is weak. I have no idea where my parents are, or if they even care that I'm suffering. I feel alone, scared, unloved, and I have no idea what to do. How could I live with so many people who preach love and happiness and yet never know love for myself? I look around the room and I see a bleach bottle over in the corner that I was supposed to be cleaning the bathrooms with. And all of a sudden the bleach becomes my way out. I grab the bottle and I chug it as fast and as much as I can. I then hide in the corner and wait for it all to disappear. I'm not sure what I was waiting for, but anything had to be better than this. I didn't really want to die, but I was sure that I no longer wanted to live the life that I had been given. I had reached the point of hopelessness where death was better than my life, so this wasn't life, it was torment and perpetual anguish. Personally, I tried killing myself twice in the group while I was still in, and I suffered 4 years anorexia and deep depression. But you were never allowed to show if you weren't happy, so the group never clocked on that, oh, maybe it was because I was absolutely miserable.
Yeah.
No, it was somehow that maybe, the devil was, inspiring me to do these things, or it was some outside force, or it was me, but it was never the group, it was never the doctrines, it was me. It was always me that was wrong. And that's probably half the reason that I internalized everything. And I always felt like such a worthless, ugly person. And it was only after leaving and making friends that I got a perspective on the outside of that people truly appreciated me as an individual, that I had something to offer, that I could make something of my life, because I never even thought I had it in me. I won't keep reading these stories because they're so depressing and I feel really bad to put you through it. But let me skip a bit to a great study that Dr. Jill Mitten did with 295 participants, and they completed a battery of questions, including the brief symptom inventory with measures of levels of psychological health. Anyway, I won't go through the whole thing, you can ask me after if you like. But this was mainly done to former members of groups like the Exclusive Brethren, who are also an isolated group and it's a Bible base as well. And what was found was that there was a significantly higher level in the second generation kids than the average population of the following psychological problems, which, the first one was obsessive compulsive behavior, and this reflects perhaps the constant vigilance that former members have described developing as children to ensure our safety, kind of watchfulness. Interpersonal sensitivity, sense of personal inadequacy and inferiority. 53% of the sample reported they were distressed by being easily hurt. Depression, study showed elevated scores as an association between life events or chronic difficulties. Depression has long been established, a lot of people suffer. Anxiety, paranoid ideation, the existence of thoughts that they're being watched all the time or talked about all the time. Psychoticism, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, as a lot of people have. There's much evidence of the symptomology of PTSD, such as hypervigilance, nightmares, avoidance of triggers such as the Bible, churches, and so on, and flashbacks. And many other problems experienced was intolerance of disagreement. They were oversensitive. They had difficulty explaining themselves or ideas to others. They a sense of loneliness, difficulty making decisions, feelings of abandonment and rejection, having no opinion or not daring to voice it, anger, disassociation, a destabilizing sense of self, and a lost or uncertain identity. It's just a few of many problems that have been found in the second generation who have left, and these are the symptoms they suffer afterwards of their time spent within these groups. So what this shows to me is that there's a high level of potential harm done to children within these groups, and something needs to be done about it. It can't continue the way it is. It can't be this level of silence and secrecy. We've got to be more aware. We've got to do something about it. One of the things we're planning in Rise International is on August 10th. We're holding an International Memorial Day in the US, the UK, Japan, and Uganda to remember all the children who have died as a result of medical neglect, of drug overdose, which a lot of children who leave experience, suicide, which has a very high rate. We're putting together a memorial website which will document the deaths of all these children in all the cults, and eventually we hope to get a very conclusive data on just how many kids have died as a result of their time spent in these groups, and I think it would be very powerful. So we're having this Memorial Day on August 10th to remember all the kids who have died, and also to celebrate our achievements as survivors, because so many didn't die, and they have moved on, and they have made something of their lives, something positive of their lives. So I just, how much time do I have left?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay. Well, I'll end on this thought. Just a few questions I'll just throw out, but I think are important for us to ponder is how do we balance freedom of religion and belief with the rights of the child? How do we raise awareness and visibility of a largely invisible problem and population? How do we gain access to monitor the welfare of children in closed, secretive groups? How do we balance the need for access with the rights of privacy? And I think these are important and very difficult questions, but they need to be addressed in order to protect children from further abuse and neglect. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take questions now, but we would like you to please make sure you phrase these as questions, not statements, okay? And I'll try to go around the room and try to get everybody I can. Back there?
We operate a long-term transitional facility where we have SGA members. We work a lot with from Fannie. And this is for Michael. One thing that you mentioned that I'm wondering if you can explain a little bit more in depth. You made the comment that the public health is very efficient at picking up the nuances around when they're out, and a lot of the SGA that we've worked with, and we have a number that are at our facility now, and they come and they stay for 9 to 15 months, and usually we get ones who are really, really struggling, multiple suicide attempts, they're cutters, they're really very, very damaged. And they're very adept at, absolutely, at reading nuances around, but their subjectivity scale is often off the charts too. So it's like moving to another planet when they come out. So their hypervigilance is very, very high, but they also don't read the environment very well. So being adept at reading, they have a very hard time navigating the shelter environment. So I'm wondering what would you suggest in terms of, they're so ramped at trying to pick up every little tiny nuance so they're not stepping on landmines, so to speak. How do you reduce that subjectivity so that they're able to relax more while they're trying to just move about in the environment?
Generally, I would say the idea is to teach them about the mechanism that they're involved in. That what they're doing is not random. It feels completely as if it is me alone doing this thing. And I would have no idea that I am engaged in a process that has characteristics that can be found in almost every thought and deed I'm involved in. So the more, I think, as we are beginning to sort of create this profile or the blueprint for the mechanisms, the mental mechanisms of that one is involved in, the more one can begin to identify those mechanisms. So that does appear to be happening. For those people who've gone to multiple, say, for instance, the Connecticut workshops, each time they come back, there's quite a few people that have come back 2 or 3 times, and they're becoming much more efficient and be able to recognize with almost every thought they have to what extent this is me acting out this process I'm involved in. And that, I think, is really important. And then, of course, talking to your peers and beginning to recognize the commonality of these mechanisms of thinking.
And just relax.
Yeah.
I'm a doctoral student. I'm studying the neurophysiology of traumatization. And I'm curious because of what you're describing as being really this stress response. You use words like hyperarousal, vigilance, things that are very seen in the trauma literature. I'm wondering if there's treatment programs that people are employing and if we're getting any data on utility of. For example, Peter Levine's work in the trauma resiliency model, somatic experiencing, anything that actually helps people to stabilize their nervous system so that they're actually using somatic awareness in their healing process.
I can just say that, to me, the most successful work being done is the very fledgling, very limited work being done on trauma, particularly, however, long-term systematic trauma and its effect. That, to the extent that that is just beginning to be being applied to the SGA population, is having a tremendous influence. And I think that is what is so excellent about what they're doing at the Connecticut workshops, is directly using and applying trauma thinking and trauma treatment in the work.
I'm glad to hear it. Lori Leach is the new research director there, and they're interested in study populations I would be willing to do, and I'm interested as a student. So.
Me too.
Yeah.
First, two questions. The website, rise.org, or?
Oh, yeah, I can give it to you. It's riseinternationalcic.org, which is community interest.
Okay.
Or you can just put riseinternationalfoundation.org and it will go to the same site.
Okay. Do you remember your number 2 point, is it Gina?
Gina?
When you were talking about the language interpretation for the SGA at the beginning, it was such a good point.
The only thing I have numbered was Merriam-Webster's definition.
Okay.
So,
I'll ask you afterwards.
yeah, if you remember what the topic was.
It was something about the how a child hears the message of another person, an authority or something.
Oh,
Is this being taped, by the way, that we could get a tape?
it is being taped. I hope that ICA has it available because
Okay.
the reason we're doing this
Are these
is
part of the-
we want
the
other
ICSA?
people to know.
Yes.
Okay, good. It's okay then, I'll get the tape.
I have
Yes.
a question, whoever would like to answer it. I had an adult cultic experience and my children got sucked into it starting when they were about 7 and 9. They're now 26 and 24. I got kicked out of the cult. They mostly were affected by their fathers. The cult brainwashed him and he brainwashed them, kind of thing. So they continue to run the party line, and so I know my experience as an adult, but I can in many ways understand what they're thinking, but they're children, so I didn't have the child experience. Is there any light you can shed on? I mean, I still try to reach them, they don't respond, but
How old were they when they left the group?
when I left they were 9 and 11.
Or are they still in?
Well, they're not in the group, but they're still under the influence of their father, who the group has kind of disbanded, but he's still mentally, he's very
May I
much.
speak to this one? Because my parents are still in the group. My brother's a Mormon high priest. My ex-husband, my children's father's founding his own cult and doing really well. So my children still have that very much part of their lives. And any family involvement in my life is more or less the equivalent of an intervention trying to pull me back in. I have no resources, as you probably don't, to get any other involvement to help the children out. And I think the only thing we can do is really still be loving, still be present for them, and let them have a vision for that there is a safe way out. At what point will they choose to take that? I don't know. For example, if I discuss this very much with my now grown children, they are 31, 26, and 20. They get very defensive. They want to love their father and their mother and their other family members who are, you wouldn't believe the stories. You would. Other people don't believe the stories. And they have the right to love those people. They have a right to claim their own personality, and they are being told and believing that their own personality is what these other people are defining for them. So, you know, my oldest one has very painfully kind of figured this out on her own and is distancing herself more from the others who are still involved and slowly regaining being close with me. All I can do is be authentic about who I am. The middle one, who is very much thrilled to be back with his father's life and all the manipulations that holds. He was using my computer at home once, and I saw him reading some of my manuscript of my upbringing. Could he really make the connection that he's living it too, with now a different facade or not? Somewhere inside him, that connection is there. My younger one, currently he's gone, but he also comes back. He dips in and out. And he's also very excited for me to publish my stuff. You know, he can't see that he's also under the influence. So he comes back and forth. What he does with me, and someone else was telling me similar, he really attacks me a lot on inconsequential things. But I know it's because he cannot attack his father. He cannot stand up to his father. He's on such eggshells around his father, who gets a lot of accolades, makes a lot of money, you know, has all the good-looking venues of any cult leader. So by attacking me, it's a safe outlet for him. And I can hold my boundaries as to what is right or wrong. But ultimately, his venting towards me is a compliment that he feels safe enough to kind of vent. I still don't let him walk all over me. He still has to do his laundry and pick up his socks. But he knows it's safe, and he knows I'll hold those boundaries. And over time, they will have to come to their own painful realization, as you did, as we did. And all we can do is be there for them.
Okay, we have time for just a few more questions.
I'm always interested to learn how the groups may have used academics as means of reinforcing and keeping SGA kids in. And, you know, TM had its own
Huge university system.
Talk
Yeah.
about it.
Well, yeah, long enough story out to, I would just say quickly that yes, all of the outside people and academics being one of them, we knew what we needed to say in order to, it was really about what was going to be happening after they were gone. We knew what we needed to say, regardless of how much we might be rebelling or being in the middle of incredible levels of abuse ourselves. It was part of our breathing, eating and sleeping, to know what to say to outsiders, and to know what to say to what kind of outsiders. And the outside interested academic was just another one, and we knew how to say it to him perfectly. Two very nice sociological articles were written about the little cult I was from, ISOT, and I could, every word that they got from all of the children who were there, I could have quoted them back way before I ever read the article, word for word, exactly, knew exactly what they're going to say.
Yeah.
It's just understood.
Yeah, let me just say something. Whenever the licensing or anybody would come to our place, because we actually ran a home finding agency and took in foster kids in our cult, and the state sent them there. So we had a lot of recruits right there to pick from. And so when state licensing would come out to find out if there was any abuse or anything, often it was me who was put there to talk to them. And I'd get a new dress, usually, you know, for the occasion. And usually all the good food got brought out, so it was a cool thing if you got to be one of the people around eating with the people coming from outside. But I knew everything to say, and it wasn't like somebody told me these things. I just knew. And they would always say, oh, she is so smart and bright and intelligent, and I mean, wow, she's, wise beyond her years, They didn't know the half of it. But yeah, I knew everything to say, and I always alleviated anybody's fears that there was anything possibly going wrong there. And I wasn't lying. They would ask me, is there abuse going on? No. Well, yeah, of course somebody was kept in a room for 3 days and read to and kept awake and not allowed to eat and maybe not even go to the bathroom. But that wasn't abuse. We were trying to save their soul. That's not abuse. When you try to save somebody, that's not abuse. When you're trying to help somebody from themselves, that's not abuse. And I didn't see it as abuse. It wasn't until later that I realized, oh yeah, that was really abusive, But, so, I mean, I could say it fully believing everything I said.
Yeah. Our group called it being a deceiver yet true.
Right.
Where basically we didn't think it was lying because it wasn't to us, it was protecting the group doctrine because the outside system wouldn't understand. And they wouldn't be able to swallow the doctrines that God had shown to us because we were unique and special. And we were put through these bear pit sessions where we would drill day after day after day after day to just shot answers back at them like that. So that by the time we did actually have to speak to lawyers, academics, anybody, it was natural as anything. We didn't have to think twice. And that's why they were like, oh no, we can tell when a kid is the answers are stunted or oh, they look frightened. But no, because we could speak so articulately and fast and we would just fire answers back because we knew exactly what to say. It seemed like it was, we definitely telling the truth. And I think that academics have a huge responsibility in that arena to be very careful that what they see is not really necessarily what they get. And I know, like, for example, in our group, they welcomed in a whole bunch of academics around the time when they were looking really bad and they're having court cases and all the rest to come in and do studies and come and see kind of thing. And because it was such a closed group, these academics felt very honored, very proud, and then they could write their reports which made them look, so very good. And what these reports did, though, is they were quite damaging because then when these cases were taken to court and these academics testified for the group, what happened then is that everything was thrown out of court. So now, all these children who were in fact abused, it's too late for them to ever get justice, and the academics played a big role in that. So I think that they have to be really careful and really it's a big responsibility for.
Because of others' questions, you can ask anyone who wants to know about how Transcendental Meditation's global network of universities work. I'm more than happy to. I was a kid growing up with all the founders.
And also, I'd say that because there is information control, you would talk to any of us, and there were the ways that they allowed us to be educated or not. And we were all definitely educated in the doctrine very, very well. But as far as our education outside of that, that varied from different organization to different organization, different cult to different cult. Some of us got a little more than others. Some of us, didn't get much at all as far as our own personal education. Yeah.
When you were training what to say, my thought is when children, I worked I'm a therapist, worked in a precinct where kids who are abused are investigated, and some of the technique in assessing was to see if they changed their story as they went, or if it was repeated the same all the time. And if it's repeated the same all the time, it's an indication that there's been leading, that they were led to say something. So were you trained to mix it up? Because I can't imagine that people couldn't catch the repetition of the story.
We were never interviewed more than once at a time.
Well, and we were, but the idea is this is what we had to do with our elders every day, is re-say everything that needed to be said all the time to every adult around us all the time. How to mix it up, how to very cleverly present ourselves in such a way as to stay out of trouble and not be destroyed again today. Doing it with some funky outsider who had 3 questions and a worldly point of view, that was... I mean, it was really, of all the tasks to do, it was an opportunity to get a couple of days of favor out of it. Yes. It was a perfect opportunity to maybe get 2 or 3 days of good grace from your leadership. It was not a challenge.
Our visitor form happened.
Yeah, it was not a challenge at all. it was
Thought reform for us is when we
easily
left.
one of the easiest things to do.
Functioning within the paradigm was natural, was
Yeah.
easy. So we could interject it within our own personality and not sound as robotic as somebody else who came in and brainwashed after the age of 15 or so. It's second nature.
Oh, yeah, we could
First
do it
nature,
to
it's
teach
first
teach converts. I mean, we did it often we would be paraded in front of the recruits, the people who joined and all that stuff, to kind of show them how this is done, let alone the outsiders. We showed the insiders how it was done. But that was our
It was a
our life.
survival skill. To be able to adapt easily and to be able to read someone, oh, they're not believing it, okay, I'll,
And
look
take
at
the
this
right
way.
words and plug it in
Right.
according to whatever the setting was.
Exactly.
It's an amazing skill that can be applied if it's used not for criminal purposes.
Obviously, we had enough integrity to walk out.
Any other questions? Yes.
Is there, what are the incidents of drug and alcohol abuse in the post-exit situation?
High. Very, very
We're gonna
high.
talk about that, but it's high. It's really high.
A lot of suicide, a lot of psychoses. When I was in graduate school, I'd been out almost 10 years. And I was in a casual study group, which I did not do very often because I was working, going to school, raising my children. And the small group I was studying with, we would have some casual conversations, as anybody does, and somebody shared about something distressing that had happened to them, and somebody else shared something else. And I said, yeah, I know. So, we had when so-and-so's skeleton was found in the cornfield and blah, blah, blah. And someone got really angry, says, do you ever notice, no matter what we say, Gina has a story to top us? And I was attacked, and that was my very first inclination that other people did not have in their personal, intimate circles the amount of psychoses, suicides, needless deaths, drug addictions, imprisonments that I thought everybody did. That those of us who got real help, those of us who are holding down jobs and not working in the drug industry, not working in the sex industry, are in the minority. And that's why we're here.
Well, in our group, it's not like that. It's almost half-half. You can say they either completely succeed,
Sort of
become
half-half.
hugely successful, use these cult talents to integrate very nicely into society and become very adaptable, or they just cannot survive and they become, like
Yeah.
she said, they're either drug addicts, kill themselves, or, become hookers or whatever, which becomes sort of self-fulfilling prophecy because that's what the group tells them will happen.
Exactly.
Right.
So then
Exactly.
you're tempted to go back because then you can get off the addiction and you can be safe.
Yeah. And definitely any way that we could possibly fail was already predicted for us. So when we do fail, then that immediately feeds right back into, see, they were right. Right? And so they line up every possible failure that any human could possibly have, which is actually normal, but we don't know this. And then anytime we fail at any of that, it leads right back to, see, they were right. Any other questions?
Does RISE address that population, the 50% that aren't functioning,
That aren't.
that are not, in terms of services and therapy?
Well, yeah, we're trying to build up services. Obviously, it's difficult just to raise money to exist because people don't want to donate to anything that's cult related. It's like an immediate blackout. People want to put their names to something that they can boast of, oh yes, I donate to Save the Children, I donate to. So if they say, oh, I donate to RISE, obviously they're going to be doing that. So it's been really hard for us. We're struggling to stay on top, but we're slowly building up a list of resources of lawyers, of academics, of therapists, because there's so few therapists actually who know cult-related issues and can properly treat, and especially for second generation, whose actually the issues are even more different than first. So it's such a small minority. It's been hard to find them, but we're slowly building up.
Can I make one last question? If all of you, if it's possible, is there any one strong influence that helped you? Because I think your stories are, I mean, I'm familiar with some of your stories, are remarkable. And to, in spite of it, you know, being born into a situation like this, and was there any one strong influence, or maybe a couple that were sort of an anchor, a rope out, or a way out? Is there anything you can think of that may have been a strong?
I think something that can make or break that 0.5%, whether they go one way or they go the other, is when they leave, if they find just one good person on the outside who nurtures them or helps them or in some way is there to listen to them, that they feel safe with. If they find that, you'll find that they become, it's almost inevitable that they succeed. If as soon as they leave, the predators catch them first, which is very often the way it is, because you know they're obviously vulnerable and predators can sniff them out instantly. Then they go the other way. So that's that balance to really find time that first year when they leave. It's a make or break usually.
I'd agree with that.
I'd say for myself, there was nobody out there because my whole family was in. So there was nobody to go to, and even if there was somebody that I wouldn't have gone to him anyway. And for me, I left to die. I knew I was going to die. That was what was going to happen. So I was leaving it. Death was going to be better than staying there.
So it was strong revulsion against it, which got you out.
No, it wasn't a strong revulsion. It was, I'm drowning here and can't breathe. I'm going to leave and probably take my children, and maybe God won't punish them because they weren't old enough to make the decision, so they won't die. But I was going believing that it would only be a matter of time before I would die. I mean, I did find out that I didn't die. I mean, eventually I found out, well, okay, it hasn't happened yet. I better start living. But this was truly inevitable for me that I would die. And God had turned his back on me, and of course my whole family had turned their back on me. I was totally shunned by everybody that I ever knew. So there was nothing to grab onto. There was just something to slip away from, to try to get away from the oppression that I was under.
For me, the one thing I had was I remembered having had contact with outsiders that were positive experiences. So that meant not everybody on the outside was evil. Now they weren't there when I left. I was alone when I left. But at one of the early jobs I had, there was a coworker. I had mentioned that I'd always wanted to go to college, but here I was 30 years old with 3 children. I couldn't go. I didn't know financial aid exists. We're really in a vacuum. It's like growing up on Mars. There's some major gaps. There always will be. And she brought me over to the local community college and stood in line with me to prove that she walked me through registration, and she walked me over to the financial aid office. I went on with a double degree summa cum laude and then was offered a Fulbright, but I couldn't live on what they offered. But, because I had the children. But, the one good person. But that wasn't somebody who I could go out and find. It was, thank God, an accident.
It happened, yeah.
But I think it's really key to find out if the SGA had any exposure to outsiders. As Marcy Hamilton mentioned when she spoke today, for all of the drama around those FLDS children. On one hand, it's going to affirm their fear of the outside world as they're then brought back. But on the other hand, they did have exposure to some caring non-members. And those who are old enough to have memories will remember.
In fact, when there was the raids and all of those kids, a lot of the kids were taken in our group, all those kids who were taken into custody, as soon as they were of age, every last one left, and they said they had the blast of their lives. And, they didn't have to be afraid of anyone, like, hitting them. They had fun, they played, they just, they ate candy and that kind of thing. That every last one of them loved it. And it wasn't like this big scary thing. So, I think that was a good experience for them, even though it's, at the time, we were torn from their parents. Of course they were sad, they missed their parents and all the rest. But they also, I think it did give them that perspective of the outside.
And I know that many of us are back for many leaving SGAs.
Yeah.
So the growing, more organized websites and SGA support groups of SGAs is becoming a group that is available to those who are leaving right now.
Yeah.
That was not available before this.
That's the biggest thing, when they come to my house, and take them to dinner at my current friends' houses. Take them to work with me, just to meet other non-cult people and have a positive interaction. One gal was recently with me, went to work with me. It's the day Maharishi Mahesh Yogi died, and all those text messages are flying. So in between that, I'm getting a fax, an email from New York Times to edit their obituary about Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and she's getting a phone call from her father, who's going to the big ritual memorial service. She says, Gina, this is too much. You are like really, really bad. I said, can't you see how much everyone hates me here? I'm really scary, aren't I? Exposing, giving them the exposure over simple things, buying shoes, the most simple, mundane, that this is another human being, friendly person, is safe, huge.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.